I'm freezing. Please, I beg of you. Let me in and I'll repay you, pleaded the weary Apache woman, her voice weak but urgent. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to hit like and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The sky over the rugged northern Arizona ridges was a heavy, dull gray, low and still. Snow had been falling since dawn, not in quick flurries but a relentless, unyielding storm that blurred the treeline and coated everything with a thick, suffocating silence. The wind wasn't howling, it was worse. It cut through the trees with a sharp, eerie quiet, winding its way down into the barren basin where the land flattened just enough for a man to survive. Clay Donovan had been chopping wood since noon. His hands were stiff, his shoulders tight from the cold that crept under his wool-lined coat. 35 years old, broad-shouldered, with the weight of past wars and unspoken burdens etched into his face, Clay lived here for one reason: solitude. His cabin was far from anyone, a place where the only visitors were the howling wind and the steady fall of snow. The cabin, battered by time, had shutters warped by the years, and snow piled up thick against its base. A year ago he boarded up the second window after it cracked in a storm. 2 years earlier he'd buried his dog beneath the sycamore by the barn. The quiet was his constant companion. He had lived here since Clara, his wife, passed away, almost 8 years ago now. Eli, their son, hadn't even made it through his second winter. After their deaths, Clay went into town maybe once every season. No one came this far out unless they were lost, desperate, or with bad intentions. So when he heard it, a soft, irregular crunch in the snow, his first instinct was caution. Straightening up, Clay gripped his axe tighter, his eyes scanning the trees beyond the fence. At first he thought it might be an elk, then maybe a thief or a prospector from Holbrook. He didn't move, only listened, his body still as a statue, boots buried deep in the snowdrift. Then he saw her. A woman, thin, barefoot, her buckskin dress torn and fluttering at the hem. She stumbled forward, sinking into the snow with each step, her arms clutching at her chest. Her hair was long and dark, braided into a single cord down her back. Her face was worn and tight from the cold. She wasn't a settler, she was Apache. Clay's gut tightened, not from hate but from a deep, instinctual understanding. Apache women didn't wander through the white man's land in the middle of winter, barefoot and on the verge of collapse, unless something had gone terribly wrong. He stepped closer, his mind racing with possibilities. Was she bait? Were there others waiting for him? But as she stumbled closer, face drawn with exhaustion and fear, that thought began to fade. Her face was too raw, too vulnerable for a trap. She collapsed to her knees just a few feet from him. Her hands dug into the snow, her body swaying as if she might pass out right there. Clay hesitated, every instinct telling him to stay away. He didn't know her. Didn't know her. The quiet life he lived had kept him alive. Then she looked up. "Please," her voice barely a whisper, dry and tight, lips cracked from the cold. "Let me in." Clay's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. "I can reward you," she added, her voice trembling. "Please?" She had nothing on her. No pack, no boots, no visible weapon. Her toes were sinking into the snow, already beginning to freeze, but it hadn't reached the frostbite stage yet. Clay considered turning around and walking back into the warmth of the cabin, letting the storm do its work. Let her die out there. She'd be gone by morning and no one would be the wiser. No risk, no complications. But instead of turning away, he took a step toward her. Slowly, he crouched beside her, his movements careful, testing her reactions. She didn't flinch. She wasn't afraid anymore. The look on her face was more about waiting for judgment than pleading for help. "Can you walk?" he asked, his voice low but steady. She didn't respond. Her eyes fluttered, then she shook her head weakly. Clay glanced around at the wilderness surrounding them, cold, empty, unforgiving. He made a decision. He scooped her up, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. She was lighter than she should have been, her body stiff against his chest, but she didn't fight him. She didn't speak again. He carried her inside, kicking the door open with his boot, and stepped into the warmth. The fire was strong, burning steadily, and a pot of beans simmered on the stove. The room was bare, just a few shelves, a cot, a table, and the fire. It smelled of smoke and pine, the scent of a man who lived alone. He set her down gently by the hearth, wrapping her in the thickest blanket he could find. She leaned against the stone fireplace, eyes fluttering open as she tried to take in her surroundings. She glanced at the rifle on the wall, then back at him, suspicion flickering in her eyes but dulled by exhaustion. Clay knelt beside her and began wrapping the blanket around her. "Keep your feet off the floor," he said, his voice firm. You'll lose him if you leave him cold. Her hands were stiff, raw but not black yet. He poured hot water from the kettle into a tin mug, adding a pinch of salt and a bit of honey from last spring, then handed it to her. Drink it slow. If you throw it up, don't expect me to clean it. She grasped the cup with both hands, her fingers shaking, but she managed to drink. Clay sat back watching her. Her throat moved slowly as she swallowed, her eyes never leaving his. She didn't speak. Clay didn't ask for her name. He didn't offer his. There was no need. What mattered was that she wasn't out there in the snow, freezing to death. He'd seen too many die that way during the war. He couldn't let her die alone in the cold. The snow kept falling that night, burying the shutters in silence. The wind howled against the cabin walls, but the logs held strong. Inside, the fire burned bright, fed by Clay's steady hand. The woman, who still hadn't spoken, sat silently by the hearth, her eyes dull but watchful. The room hung heavy with silence. He could have asked her why, but the way she said it, so matter-of-fact, so final, told him all he needed to know. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was just telling the truth. Clay nodded once, his voice low. "You hungry?" She hesitated before nodding slightly. He stood up, ladled some beans into a bowl, and tore off a chunk of bread, placing it in front of her with a spoon. She took the bowl slowly, her hands still trembling, but she didn't rush. She ate with purpose, every bite measured, like she'd been taught not to waste a single crumb. She finished half the bowl, then set it aside, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Clay watched her for a moment, then asked, "What's your name?" "Willow," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Clay," he replied, letting the silence settle. He studied her closely, then something catching his eye. Her clothes weren't travel gear. No, they were ceremonial, made for rituals, gatherings, or maybe something of status. The dress was torn, stained with pine sap, and thin enough to let the cold creep right through. She hadn't worn these to survive. She had worn them for something else. "You were important," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes stayed fixed on the fire. "I was his wife," she said. "Who's the chief?" Clay asked, leaning back slightly, piecing things together. The ceremonial cloth, the bone necklace, even the posture she held, it all made sense. But one thing didn't. Why had a chief's wife been left to die alone in the snow? "Didn't have any children?" he asked, already suspecting the answer. Willow's gaze turned sharp. Defensive. "No, not with him." Clay didn't press further. He just nodded and leaned back in his chair. She took another slow bite of bread, chewing carefully, never looking at him again. "You can stay here," Clay said, his tone firm. "Until the weather breaks." She didn't thank him, not right away. She didn't have to. He didn't expect gratitude. He just wanted to survive. She seemed to understand that. Later that night, Clay unrolled a spare cot and set it up across from the fire. He placed a second blanket on top and gestured toward it. She moved slowly, every muscle stiff from the cold, but she stood on her own. Clay watched her test her weight on her feet, wincing in pain, but she didn't fall. That surprised him. Most people would have been in tears, but not her. He turned away to give her privacy as she lay down. Then for the first time she spoke again. "You're alone too." Clay glanced at her, surprised. She wasn't asking, just observing. He nodded, his voice quiet. 8 years. She didn't ask what had happened. He didn't tell her. Neither of them spoke again. Outside, the wind picked up once more. The world turned white beneath the pale moonlight. Inside, Clay fed the fire, adding another log, then settled back into his cot. The quiet stretched out. It wasn't warm between them, not yet, but it wasn't cold either. Willow was there, alive, breathing. For now, that was enough. By morning, the storm had buried the yard under another foot of snow. The fence line had disappeared, and even the chicken coop was nearly sealed shut by the wind-driven drifts. The sky stayed low, heavy with more of the same. The cold wasn't letting up, not up here. It pressed in day after day until the logs cracked in the walls and the water buckets froze solid if left unattended. Clay was already outside at dawn, clearing the path to the barn with a shovel. His breath came out in thick clouds, and his fingers, even with gloves, stung as he worked. He checked on the 2 cows, shoveling fresh straw into their stalls. He didn't rush. That was how you stayed alive out here. Steady, no matter how bitter the wind was. If he left the work, the roof might collapse. If he waited too long, the livestock would suffer. And he wasn't about to let that happen, not after 2 winters. Inside, Willow woke to the smell of ash and beans warming on the stove. Her legs still ached, her toes burning, but she could feel them again at least. She wiggled them beneath the blanket, her brow furrowed as she tried to gauge the damage. Her hands weren't as raw, but her mind was still racing. She looked around the cabin again, this time taking in the details. The rifle on the wall, the simple, efficient arrangement of the room. No frills. Just the bare essentials. A man's space. A place where visitors weren't expected. She sat up, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, then gingerly tested her feet on the ground. Pain shot up her calves, but she could bear it. She limped to the stove, holding onto the table for balance. That's where Clay found her when he stepped back in, her back to him, one hand braced on the stove as she tried to ladle food from the pot. "You should have waited," he said flatly, stepping inside and kicking the door shut behind him. "I didn't," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm not helpless." Clay didn't argue. He shrugged off his gloves and scarf, then moved to the basin to wash up. "That doesn't mean you're not hurt." She turned her head just slightly, looking at him with guarded eyes. "I can do small things." Clay nodded. "All right, just don't collapse." He finished washing up and came over to adjust the flame. Willow moved aside, letting him finish ladling 2 bowls of beans. He handed one to her without ceremony. They ate in silence, but this time, it wasn't the same heavy silence. It felt practical, as if they'd accepted the unspoken understanding between them. Midway through the meal, Clay asked what had been weighing on his mind since she arrived. "Where were you trying to go?" Willow chewed slowly, then answered, "I wasn't." Clay frowned slightly. "So what were you doing out there in the snow?" "I just walked," she said, her eyes steady. He didn't understand. "Into the snow with no food or boots?" She met his gaze, unflinching. "I wasn't supposed to live." The room went still. Clay's hand tightened around the tin cup in front of him, but he didn't ask the next question. He didn't need to. She'd already answered him. "You were cast out to die," he said softly. Willow nodded, her voice low. "It's what's done." Clay stared at the table, troubled. That kind of thinking didn't sit right with him. He'd seen enough cruelty in his day. But to turn your back on someone just because they couldn't have children, to leave them to die in the snow, it went against everything he believed in. "You don't strike me as someone who gives up," he said after a long pause. Willow's face twitched slightly, but her voice stayed calm. "I didn't want to die, but I accepted it." Clay didn't know how to respond. There was no easy answer. He stood up, cleared their bowls, and set them in the wash basin. "You can stay here," he said again, this time more firmly. "As long as you need. I've got room." Willow looked at him, really looked at him this time. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer her anything he couldn't keep. That afternoon she asked for a knife. Clay hesitated. "What for?" "My hair," she said, motioning to the frayed ends of her braid. "It's tangled and dirty. I don't want to carry the past with me." Clay nodded once and handed her his small utility knife. She didn't waste time with thanks. She took it and moved to sit by the fire. He didn't watch her do it, but later he saw the black braid laid out on the floor beside the coals, cut short, clean and even. Her eyes were calmer after that. That evening, Willow helped peel potatoes while Clay salted meat. She worked slowly but without complaint. She never asked about his past, about Clara or Eli, or about the years he'd spent alone in this place. And he didn't ask her about the chief or why she hadn't had children. But he noticed one thing. Her hands weren't clumsy. They moved with skill, practiced from a lifetime of hard work. This wasn't a woman who'd lived soft. She'd skinned animals, built fires, cleaned hides. She'd known labor. The days were getting a little longer, though the sun still barely managed to climb over the ridge before dipping back behind the trees. The cold wasn't as urgent anymore, but it was still biting. Clay noticed the changes first. His axe didn't stick with every swing, the barn door didn't freeze shut by mid-morning, and the cows were moving with less stiffness, no longer huddling up against the walls. Even inside, things had shifted. Willow no longer needed help to stand. Her limp remained, but she moved around the cabin on her own, fetching firewood, peeling potatoes, straightening up without a word. She didn't talk much, but Clay had stopped waiting for her to. When she did speak, her voice was steadier, calmer. One day, while Clay added another log to the fire, he heard the sound of scraping metal and a soft breath. He turned to see Willow struggling to carry a heavy water bucket from the stove to the wash basin. Her fingers were still weak from the cold, her grip unsteady. "You don't have to do that," Clay said, crossing the room. "I want to," she replied, her eyes fixed on the bucket, which tilted dangerously. "Let me do something." Clay took the bucket from her gently, not dismissing her but holding it with steady hands, making sure not to spill any water. She stepped back, standing silently until he was done. Then out of nowhere she spoke, her voice low but firm. "It wasn't me." Clay looked at her, confused. I wasn't the one who couldn't give him children, she clarified, her voice quieter now. He was old, older than my father. He chose me for ceremony. They said I was a blessing. But when the seasons passed and there was no child, her voice trailed off. Clay didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Did you know for sure? He asked after a moment, his voice careful. Willow nodded. I knew. There was a boy when I was 15. Close to my age. We didn't stay together long. It was secret. I lost that baby early. No one knew. Her voice didn't crack. She wasn't confessing. It was just the truth. Clay didn't judge her. He'd seen worse done by better men. He just nodded, understanding more than words could say. You were cast out because of him, weren't you? Clay asked, his voice soft but sure. Willow nodded. It's what's done. Clay's mind raced. He understood now why she'd looked so close to death when she first arrived. She hadn't been given time to prepare. She'd been cast aside like nothing, no concern for whether she had food or boots. Clay stood, moving to the shelf, and took a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. He pulled out a clean bar of soap, a comb, and a pair of thick wool socks, gray, worn but warm. He set them on the table next to her without a word. Willow stared at them for a moment, then met his eyes. Thank you, she whispered. It was the first time she'd said it, and Clay knew she didn't say it lightly. That afternoon, Clay worked outside repairing the chicken coop, while Willow stayed inside washing her hair with snowmelt. He didn't see her do it, but when he returned, her hair was braided cleanly, tied with a short piece of twine. Her posture was straighter. The torn ceremonial dress she'd arrived in was now layered with one of his flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up, hem tucked under a belt. She still walked carefully, but there was purpose to her now. As they ate together that evening, Clay asked the question that had been on his mind since she arrived. You plan to go back when the thaw comes? Willow didn't answer right away. She stirred the pot of stew, eyes fixed on the steam. After a long pause, she said, There's nowhere to go. What about your tribe? Clay asked. They're not mine anymore, Willow said, her voice steady but distant. Clay didn't press. He didn't need to. She wasn't ready to share that part of her life, and he wasn't about to force her. How long have you lived here? She asked after a while. 7 years, Clay answered, his voice quieter than usual. 8 maybe. After the war I came west. I wanted land. Quiet. Got both. Willow didn't respond right away, but when she did, her voice softened. Your wife, did she like it here? Clay's face tightened. She never saw it. I was building this place when she died. Willow's expression didn't change, but she sat down across from him, her voice quieter now. I'm sorry. Clay gave a small nod. You're not the only one who's lost something. They ate in companionable silence, the conversation turning to more practical matters. Willow asked about the cows in the garden, and Clay showed her the cellar where he kept the smoked meat. They talked about work, not feelings. It was how they both understood things. Later, as the fire flickered low and the wind howled outside, Clay said, Spring's still a long ways off, but if you stay through it, I'll help you build something. Willow turned toward him slowly, her expression unreadable. What do you mean? I'll build you a room, Clay said. A place of your own, off the side of the cabin. Doesn't have to be temporary. Willow studied his face for a moment, not surprised, but weighing the words carefully. You're offering me a place? I'm offering you the choice, Clay replied. She didn't answer then, but later that night as she lay in the bed, she didn't wrap herself in the blanket as tightly. For the first time since her arrival, she slept without fear in her eyes. The days started to lengthen slightly, though the sun still barely cleared the ridge. A weak thaw touched the edges of the snowpack near the cabin, but only during the warmest hours. Icicles clung stubbornly to the roof, and the wind still carried the bite of deep winter. But something inside had shifted. Willow started waking before Clay, moving quietly around the cabin, rekindling the stove, checking the water, wiping down the table. Her limp was lighter now, and with each passing morning, the air between them grew a little less tense. Clay noticed the small things, how she folded the blankets, how she handled the knife while slicing potatoes, how she moved with purpose, like she'd always belonged there. One morning as they ate side by side, Willow looked up from her bowl and asked, Do you still go into town? Clay wiped his mouth with his sleeve and nodded. Once every few weeks. Sometimes longer, depending on the weather. Is it far? Willow asked. 15 miles if the trail's clear. 20 if I have to go around the ridge. And people there know you? She asked. They know I keep to myself, Clay replied. Willow didn't ask to go. She didn't ask about the people. But Clay could tell she was thinking ahead, beyond just surviving. That afternoon, Clay brought down a pile of old lumber from the loft above the barn. He started laying it out next to the cabin. Rough boards, some warped with age, others still usable. Willow stood on the porch, arms crossed against the cold, watching him. "You meant it," she said after a while. "About building something?" Clay asked, looking up. "I don't say things I don't mean," he replied. Willow stepped down onto the snow and moved beside him. "Then let me help." "You sure?" Clay asked. Willow nodded. Clay handed her a hammer, showing her how the framing would go. It was simple, sturdy, nothing fancy, just enough space for a small room off the side of the cabin. A place for her to sleep if she wanted privacy, or to use as she saw fit. It wasn't a gesture of control. It was a gesture of permanence. As they worked, Willow asked about the wood, the nails, and how to keep the boards flush. She learned quickly, her hands still rough but steady. She gritted her teeth when her foot ached, but she never stopped working. Not once. That evening when they were done, Clay handed her a cup of warm cider. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. Willow looked at him across the firelight. "I'm not proving. I'm choosing." Clay nodded, understanding more than words could express. The cold wasn't as urgent now, but it still cut through the air. Clay noticed it first. The swing of his axe no longer felt as heavy, the barn door didn't freeze shut by midday, and the cows weren't huddled close to the walls anymore, though they still breathed heavy. Inside there was a shift too. Willow no longer needed help to stand. She still limped, but she moved around the cabin on her own now, fetching firewood, peeling potatoes, tidying up the place without a word. She didn't speak much, but Clay had stopped waiting for her to. When she did speak, her voice was steady, grounded. That morning, as Clay added another log to the fire, he heard a soft scraping sound followed by a quiet breath. Turning, he saw Willow struggling with a heavy water bucket, trying to move it from the stove to the wash basin. Her grip was weak, the cold still working its way through her hands. "You don't have to do that," he said, crossing the room to her. "I want to," she replied, her eyes fixed on the bucket. "Let me do something." Clay took the bucket from her hands with a steady grip and poured the water without spilling a drop. She stepped back and stood silently until he was finished. Then, almost out of nowhere, Willow spoke quietly, "It wasn't me." Clay paused, confused. "I wasn't the one who couldn't give him children," she added, her voice a bit quieter now. "He was old, older than my father. They chose me for ceremony. They said I was a blessing. But when the seasons passed and there was no child..." Her voice trailed off. Clay didn't interrupt, just sat silently, waiting. "Did you know for sure?" he asked carefully. Willow nodded, her gaze never leaving the floor. "I knew. There was a boy years ago when I was 15. He was close to my age. We didn't stay together long. It was secret. I lost that baby early. No one knew." She didn't sound ashamed. It wasn't a confession. It was just the truth. Clay didn't judge her. He'd seen worse things done by men who claimed to be better than her. "You were cast out to die, weren't you?" Clay asked softly. Willow's nod was slow. "It's what's done." Clay understood now. She'd been left with nothing. No time to prepare, no food, no boots, just turned out, abandoned without a second thought. He stood and walked to the shelf, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. He placed a bar of soap, a comb, and a pair of thick wool socks on the table beside her. As they worked, Willow asked questions about the wood, the nails, how to keep the boards flush. She learned quickly, her hands still rough but steady. She gritted her teeth when her foot ached, but she never stopped. That evening after dinner, Clay handed her a tin cup of warm cider. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. Willow looked at him across the firelight. "I'm not proving. I'm choosing." Clay nodded, understanding more than he could say. Clay stepped closer to Willow, his hand brushing her cheek gently. "We'll make sure she knows," he said softly. Later that week, a coyote wandered too close to the chicken coop. Clay shot it from the porch, the bullet cutting clean through its shoulder. Willow stood beside him afterward, watching as the animal finally grew still in the snowdrift. "Most men would have killed it on sight," she remarked. "It wasn't hunting," Clay replied, his voice steady. "It was starving." "You've seen too much death to chase after more," he added, his eyes meeting hers. "Haven't you?" Willow nodded. "That's why I'm here." That night, as they finished their supper, Clay did something he hadn't done in nearly a decade. He sat beside her at the table, leaned just a little closer and said her name, not to get her attention but just to say it. "Willow." She looked at him, calm and steady. He nodded once, slow and without hesitation. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't rushed or forced, just quiet and real. She pulled back slightly, looked him in the eye and said, "I'm not leaving." And for the first time in 8 years, Clay, who had always expected people to walk away eventually, said softly, "Good." The kiss didn't change the weather. The snow still clung to the pines. The wind still whispered through the cracks in the cabin walls. But something inside had shifted, something deep and unspoken. And not just in the silence or the looks. The next morning, Willow didn't act any differently. She still rose early, stoked the fire, and moved quietly through the cabin. But now, when they spoke, she stood a little closer. Her eyes no longer darted away when Clay looked at her. And when their hands brushed by accident at the table or the wash basin, neither of them pulled back. Clay noticed. Every movement, every breath, they both carried a weight of loss. Neither of them rushed, but now there was a door open between them and they had both stepped through it. That morning they worked side by side again, the extension to the cabin halfway framed. The snow beneath their feet had already packed down solid. Willow stood beside Clay, holding one end of a board while he hammered it into place. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, strands of hair clinging to her jaw, but she looked strong, present. As they worked, Clay's thoughts kept circling back to what Willow had said, "I'm not leaving." He hadn't asked what that meant, whether it meant staying through the season or staying forever, but deep down he already knew. Willow didn't say things she didn't mean, and neither did he. That evening, after the fire was roaring and supper had been cleaned up, Willow sat on the cot she still used at night, combing her hair slowly and carefully. Clay sat at the table, oiling the hinges on his trap box. The silence between them was comfortable. Then Willow asked softly, "Do you miss her?" Clay didn't pretend not to understand. He set the cloth down, thought for a moment, then answered quietly, "I did for a long time." Willow waited patiently, not pressing for more. "She was kind," Clay continued, his voice distant. "But it got harder after the baby came. Eli didn't make it through the winter." Willow's hand slowed. "That's why you built this place." "I needed distance," Clay said. "I didn't want reminders." Willow nodded. "And now," Clay looked at her, his voice steady, "now it doesn't feel like I'm running anymore." Willow continued brushing her hair. "You let me in," she said quietly. "Not just through the door." Clay stood slowly, crossed the room and crouched in front of her. "You came here with nothing," he said, his voice low but steady. "I saw you dying out there in the snow and you never begged. You stood up even when you could barely walk." Willow didn't flinch. Her eyes met his. Clay reached forward and gently took the comb from her hand, setting it aside, then touched her jaw with quiet fingers. She didn't flinch. She leaned in slightly, just enough, and he kissed her again, this time slower, longer. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I want this, but I wanted it to be on my terms." Clay nodded. "Serious?" "It always will be." They stayed close but not rushed. Then Willow stood and walked to the fire, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Clay followed, the wind pressing softly against the cabin walls, no longer a threat but just part of the rhythm. That night, for the first time, they lay in the same bed. Willow climbed beneath the quilt without hesitation, her bare feet brushing against his. Clay held her close but didn't try to claim her. He just kept his arms around her, steady, present. Their bodies moved quietly together, without ceremony, without urgency. It wasn't about heat or hunger. It was slow, steady, a meeting of survival and choice. The fire crackled softly behind them, casting a warm light across the wooden walls. When it was done, they didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Later, in the dark, Willow whispered, "If I carry a child this time, it won't belong to anyone but me." Clay's voice came soft against her hair. "It'll belong to both of us. But no one else." Willow didn't reply, but the way she settled against him said everything. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle this time, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt cold. By mid-April, the last of the snow had melted from the lower trails. The mornings were still sharp with cold, but by noon the ground softened underfoot, and the pines dripped with meltwater. Clay had moved the cows back to the west pasture, where shoots of green had started to push up through the damp soil. Every day brought new sounds: running water, bird song, insects tapping on the cabin windows. Inside the cabin, life had shifted in ways Clay hadn't imagined a season ago. The space no longer felt like a shelter built for one man's grief. It felt lived in. Willow's work basket sat under the table, filled with mending she never rushed. His shirts hung on the line beside her flannel wrap. The new room was no longer just finished. It was painted with soft strokes of color, made from crushed bark and plant dyes Willow had gathered. The small shelf Clay had promised was up, with a pine carving from his mother sitting on it. Willow moved more slowly now, her belly clearly rounded beneath the wrap she wore. She never complained, but Clay could see how she paced herself, how she rested more often between tasks. Sometimes she stood by the open window, one hand bracing the frame, the other gently resting on her stomach. One morning, Clay brought her a basin of warm water and a cloth without being asked. Willow sat by the stove, soaking her feet, her face calm but thoughtful. "You never asked for any of this," she said quietly. "I didn't have to," Clay replied. "You came." She looked up at him. "Are you ready?" "I'm not afraid," he said. "That's enough." Willow reached for his hand and guided it over the curve of her belly. The child stirred beneath his palm, stronger now, not just flutters but a slow turning pressure. Clay didn't speak. He just nodded, and Willow knew. That afternoon they walked together to the ridge, where the land dipped toward the basin. From there they could see far into the valley. Clay pointed out the new bloom near the creek, and Willow picked a sprig of wild mint. She pressed it between her fingers and smiled faintly. That was the first time Clay saw her smile without effort, open without holding back. On the way back, Willow stopped at the stump where they had left the letter for her mother. It was gone. In its place was a strip of woven cloth, a small sash, deep red, the color of her old lodge's ceremonial thread. She picked it up with both hands. There were no words, no note. Just the cloth. She whispered, "Clay, look." He looked at her, still unsure. "Is it a good sign?" Willow nodded slowly. "It means I'm no longer ghosted. I'm remembered." They walked home in silence, but it wasn't empty. The air felt full of something old being settled. That evening, Willow prepared a stew with the last of the carrots they had stored through the winter. She moved carefully, pausing as the child kicked hard, her hands steadying herself against the table. Clay rose from his chair and moved behind her, supporting her waist. "I've got you," he said softly. "You always do," she murmured, leaning back into him. Later, when the fire had burned low and the dishes were washed, Willow took Clay's hand and led him to their bed. She lay beside him, pulling the quilt up over them both. In the quiet that followed, she turned to him and said, "You never asked if I wanted to marry you." "I figured I didn't need to," Clay said, his voice low. "We already chose each other." Willow smiled again, though this time it was smaller, quieter. "Still asking, huh?" Clay met her gaze, his eyes steady, unwavering. "Will you be my wife?" She nodded once, slow and sure. "I already am." The child shifted inside her, and Clay placed his hand over her belly like he had so many nights before. But this time he spoke the words aloud. "Our child." Willow covered his hand with hers, her voice soft as she whispered, "Our family." By the following week, spring had fully settled in. The buds on the trees had turned to fresh, green leaves. The hens clucked in the yard, fat and loud once more. The cabin, which had once been a place of isolation, a refuge for quiet survival, had transformed. It was a home now, rooted, alive. Willow stayed. Clay stayed. And soon enough, the child they had waited for would be born in the room they had built together. In a house where no one would ever be cast aside for failing to meet expectations. In this place there were no titles, no demands, just presence, choice and care. And for the first time in their lives that was enough.